Alright, what is up everybody? Today we're going to do a step-by-step of removing and installing a new toilet. So we're removing an old toilet rather and installing a new toilet. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's pick our tools here. First thing we'll need is the wet vac so that we can suck out all the old water. Okay, so we got a putty knife, got a 5/8 open end wrench for the supply, and we've got a combination 1/2 and 9/16 wrench for the Johnny bolts and the tank to bowl bolts, and I think that's everything. Let us also, I'm going to wait on these rings until we see what the flange is, if it's recessed or if it's above the floor, and I will grab some Johnny bolts. We'll take these and throw them into the bucket. I also have back here, that fell out, is our little hacksaw so we can cut the Johnny bolts. That way we can put the caps on. And we need a towel. And 2 towels. One to put the toilet on and one to soak up some water if anything spills out. Last but not least, got a couple pages of old newspaper to put the old wax in. Okay, here we are. Okay, first things first, come down here and shut the supply stop off. And we'll take the lid of the tank off. Next we will flush all of the water out as much as we can. I see. I noticed when I first got here that it was running a little bit. And if you notice, that red seal is supposed to come up with the assembly, the flush valve here. That is the flush valve, but obviously that has failed at some point, so that's why it was running. Okay, next step is to find an outlet to plug in our wet vac and then suck the water out. Some guys use a sponge and we'll just sponge it into a bucket or use a siphon hose and suck it out with that. But we just use a wet vac. This one happens to just sit on a 5-gallon bucket, so if we ever have to pump out something nasty, we can just throw the bucket away and get a new one. Okay, and once you find a working outlet, then you can suck the water out. It's a lot faster than sponging it or trying to siphon it out. Once you're done with that, you take one of your towels, spread it out onto the floor, so that when you pull the toilet, you can put it on the towel, because sometimes, no matter how good of a job you do vacuuming it out, there's still water down in the trapway. Then you take your other towel, put it under the supply here, so we can undo our supply from the tank. One thing I did forget to mention when I was shutting the supply off is you want to take a look at your supply. This one looks like it's in pretty good condition. It's coming right off a copper pipe here, and there's not much corrosion, but if there's a lot of corrosion, if you notice that there are threads at the back of the stop here, and there's a lot of white powdery type corrosion, mineral buildup and whatnot, be very, very cautious turning that off, if you even want to risk turning it off at all. the best option at that point would be to go to your water main, shut the whole house off, and plan on replacing the stop, because there's a very good chance that as soon as you put the slightest bit of torque on that stop, you're just going to break those threads off, and then you're going to be pouring water everywhere, and that's not what you want to be doing. Okay, so once you have the supply off, then we go down to our Johnny bolts down here. We pop the covers off here. Sometimes they don't want to come free, so what I do is I'll take the putty knife, and you usually work that under there, and use that kind of to pry it up. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Pardon the dust bunnies, but we'll just pop this up, hopefully. There we go. Then you take your 9/16 side of the wrench, as long as it's a standard Johnny bolt with a brass nut, and loosen it right up. Not a problem. Sometimes if it's the steel style with like a chrome nut, they're smaller. Sometimes they're as small as 7/16. We might be able to reuse these Johnny bolts. We'll see. So I'll set the nuts off to the side. This you can toss. And then we'll come over to here and do the same thing again. Sometimes these Johnny bolts, the nuts get stuck on them, so what you do in that case, I've found, is you can take your putty knife and kind of twist it and apply vertical pressure so that you can then stop the actual bolt from spinning, and sometimes you can then free the nut. But these ones are pretty good. The bolt itself is staying still. Set the washer aside, toss the cap retainer, and we're ready to pull it. So now to pull it, just get in a pretty good stance, grab it pretty much between the bowl and the tank, and then you just kind of lift it up. I usually rest my forearms on my knees and kind of give it a pry. This one, the wax came up with it, and then I rest it down on the towel. Once it's down on the towel, some of that water will drain out. I'll lift it up and then kind of rock it back and forth just to work any of that extra water out, so when I'm walking it out to the truck, there's not water, pouring out the bottom of it. As far as carrying toilets, I've found the best method is to pick it up, like I said, between the bowl and the tank, kind of find that center of gravity, and then I'll lift it, and I usually rest the bowl right against my thighs, and then I can kind of lean back into it and hold it. So then a lot of the weight is actually going straight through to my thighs and then down my legs, and then you just kind of waddle with it like that. It's easier than trying to straddle it and carry it. Then, like I said, I'll just rock it back and forth to make sure any of the water in the trapway gets out, and then we'll take this one out. Got the apprentice doing the work today. Now it's time to inspect the flange. A lot of times the wax will stay on here. Doesn't always come off with the toilet. So in any case, you want to scrape any of the extras. You want to scrape any of the excess wax off. And that can also kind of give you a good indication of how our flange is. This is, when it's just red paint like this, it's just a steel flange, so sometimes these will just rust out and you have to get repair flanges. Nowadays we try to install stainless steel all the time, then you don't have to worry about it rusting away. This flange looks pretty good though. These edges aren't pulling up or anything like that, so I'd say we're in pretty good shape. And we'll take our towel and kind of clean up the edges here. Keep some of that powder underneath. Okay, then we'll take our new Johnny bolts. These are just regulars. And you want to make sure the washer stays above. And you just kind of slip it into the slot. Do the same thing on the other side. Make sure not to drop it down the hole. And I'll take the nuts and washers out. I'll separate them. I'll put a nut and a washer over on this side and a nut and a washer over on this side. And then you want to kind of find the center line of your opening and kind of line those up with it. Since this flange is above the floor and not sitting below the floor, I'm going to use just a regular wax gasket. Not a jumbo or anything like that. There's really no need to use one with a horn in this application. So the regular wax is what you're going to get. I'll just set that like that. And then it's time to put the toilet together. Actually, before we put the toilet together, I am going to change this with the new one. I've seen a lot of these white ones with the thin nut up top split. Don't know why, but I have. So I'm going to change this. Okay, so for this, we'll take our 5/8 open end wrench. Again, if you go to do this and you see a lot of corrosion with that horizontal torquing, you can see here just how much that supply moves. If it's really bad, you don't want to do that. You'll break it off. But this one doesn't look too bad. So we'll just pull it off. Now what you saw there was the water coming out of the supply, draining back. That's why you want a towel there. We'll take our new one. This is a heavier. As you can see, this is quite a bit heavier plastic here. These ones I haven't seen fail. These ones I have seen just split. So we'll just spin this on. Dry everything off so when we go to turn the water on, we can see if there's anything dripping. Okay, today we're installing a Toto Drake. First thing to unbox is the bowl. They always come shipped upside down. Put that to the side like that, and you just slide the bowl out. Okay, next thing to unbox is the tank. The apprentice has already opened it for me, and we'll just pull this out and bring it in. Okay, so inside the tank is usually where you get your installation manual here. You also get your bag that has all your washers, your tank to bowl bolts, your tank to bowl gasket, and the Johnny bolt covers. So we'll open that up. We'll set the tank to bowl gasket aside. It also comes with, well, we'll set the two Johnny bolt covers aside. it usually comes with a supply nut for a hard supply. In this case, we don't need it. The soft supply already has it. It also comes with a hard supply gasket, but we don't need that either. So that can get tossed. We have our cap covers. Set those aside. Then finally you have your tank to bowl bolts, washers, and nuts. So with the Totos, you have your sealing gasket, which goes on your bolt first, your tank to bowl bolt first. Just like that. Then you have 4 washers and 4 nuts. 2 washers and 2 nuts are used to clamp the bolt to the tank, and then 2 washers and 2 nuts are used to bolt the tank to the bowl. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll turn the tank on its side. We'll take one of our bolts, we'll stick it in. It's always a trick getting your hand around the fill valve and flush valve, finding your hole. And sticking the bolt through, just like that. You press on it, you put one of your metal washers, then you put your nut on there. Sometimes they thread on nice, sometimes they don't thread on so nice. This one's threading fine, it's just not spinning on quickly. Then you do the same thing for the bottom hole. Put your washer, then your nut, and it spun on a little bit better. Then you take your 1/2-inch side of your open end wrench. I usually hold on the bolt here. There's usually enough friction with the gasket and everything that you can just hold it and torque this down a little bit. You want to go snug, you don't have to go too crazy, just like that. Then you do the same thing down here. And what you want to do, you want to tighten up your nut, and then if you're not sure, you can watch the head of that bolt. And as you tighten it, you'll see the head of the bolt sink into the gasket. And as it squeezes that gasket, you'll see it indent just a little bit. Once it does that, you know you're going to have a pretty good seal. Finally, you'll take your tank to bowl gasket. Sometimes these are formed with the edges of the nut in it. This one just happens to be a round one. So we'll just pop that on there like that. Then you'll notice that there's a ridge around here, and then there are bumps that are proud of the ridge. These are actually seating feet, so when you put the tank on and start bolting it down, you'll bolt it down until it hits these feet here, and that will stop the tank from wobbling. Take the tank, come around, line ourselves up with the holes, set it into place roughly. Then you want to take a bird's eye view of it, looking straight down, and make sure that the tank is square with the bowl, because there is a little bit of play. So with it looking pretty square, then we'll climb underneath and put the other washers and nuts on. One thing I've found that you can do is you can kind of put your arm over it, and then you can push down and kind of compress that tank to bowl gasket so that you can get your washers and nuts on, and you can actually get quite a bit of it already threaded on without actually having to use the wrench. So we'll put this on here like that, and we'll put our nut on there. And if you see, there's the nut and then a little bit of thread showing. But then when you come to the other side, there's not too much thread showing here, so you go to the top of the tank and you can push down on it. And then you can get your washer up and your nut on there. And then you end up with that little bit of thread showing. Now, like I had said, you can actually then push down even farther and thread it on a little bit more, and do the same thing to the other side. Again, you can push down and thread it on a little bit farther. Now, if you notice, our back foot here is touching, but our front feet are not, so the tank will wobble on there. So that's why you want to then take your 1/2-inch wrench and just slowly tighten it, going from one side to the other. Until you're just touching. You come to this side, and we're pretty good right there, like that. Okay, so with the tank on the bowl now, we can then lift it and set it. The other thing I'm going to do is, like we had done with the Johnny Bolt nuts and washers, I'm just going to separate these, put a cap and a retainer on one side and a cap and a retainer on the other side. Okay, with that done, we will now set this toilet. Again, grabbing it between the tank and the bowl, kind of center of gravity. You can rest your forearms on your knees to lift and kind of swing that under you. So then you can waddle over, line up your Johnny Bolt holes, and set it into place. Once you have it set, sometimes the wax will squish out and the weight of the toilet will just squish it out, especially in the summer when the wax is soft. In the winter when the wax is hard, sometimes you have to wobble it down. You also want to bring the wax in sooner so that it has a little bit of time to warm up. Once you have it set, you can take your cap retainer. It says on there this side up, so you want to put that side up. Sometimes I'll see it where the metal washer is under this, but you usually put this down first. Then you take your metal washer, put that on there. Then you take your Johnny Bolt nut. I know Johnny Bolt is probably a brand name. I don't know, what are these? Flange bolts? Closet bolts? That's probably what they are. Oh, this one's being a little stubborn. Thread that down. And you do the same thing on the other side. Take your retainer washer with the right side facing up. Then you take your metal washer, put that down and on there. Then you take your nut.
My brother does that.
And you put the nut on there. Then you take your 9/16 open end wrench again. And you just, I know if I'm using the wrench the wrong way. It should be this way. And you just kind of snug it down. Go to the other side. Do the same thing over here. Snug it down. And a lot of times when you go to cut these, they'll loosen up a little bit, and you just snug it down a little bit more. What I've found to make sure that you have good, tight Johnny bolts or closet bolts is then go to the front of the bowl and kind of push it side to side, almost like you bump it with your leg or something. And if you can't push it side to side and it doesn't move side to side, you're pretty well anchored to the floor. The final step and most tedious step is to take your hacksaw and come up above the nut just a little bit, because if you don't, well, then your cap doesn't go on. So and then you want to just go back and forth. Hear the pitch change a little bit. You then twist it and then just break the rest off. Go to the other side. Same thing over here. Now if you slip off like that, you don't really have to worry. The porcelain's pretty tough. It's pretty hard to scratch it or dent it. Not that you can really dent it. Give it a little twist. Wiggle it back and forth. Fatigue the metal. Eventually, it just pops off. Then you can take your towel, especially the damp part, just kind of clean up those brass filings. Next step is to take your supply, connect that up. And then finally, before you fill it and do all the real testing, you put your seat on. The apprentice has already unboxed it and put the little rubber feet on for me. Just like that. You want to hold them in place because they can slide around. Line it up with your holes and push it down. So a lot of times the slow close lids are not down all the way. Then you take your seat bolt, stick it in the hole, take your other seat bolt, stick it in the hole, and then you want to kind of feel and line your seat up with the edge of the bowl. Then you can take your seat nut, hopefully thread that on. Then you take your seat nut, thread that on. Then you hold the nut from underneath, take a flathead screwdriver, give it a twist to really sock those bolts down. Do the same thing on the other side, just like so. Come back, open your lid and your seat. Make sure that they close nice and slow. That looks pretty good and slow to me. So with that closing, then we can come back here and just put our covers down. That's super slow. Alright, so with everything assembled, we can then turn the water supply on and check for leaks. First place to look is right at the stem here. The first place to look for a leak is right at the stem here. You want to make sure, especially after using the valve that hasn't been used in a long time, to just check and make sure there is no water leaking out here. Otherwise you might have to tighten this packing nut. Like I said though, if there's lots of corrosion around here, if you see threads in this vicinity and white powder, do not touch it. Just shut the water off at the main and change the stop. Next area to look at would be your compression fitting here, making sure that that is all nice and dry. And then finally, you want to look at your fill valve supply nut and make sure that that's all dry. Everything here looks good. Then you want to come up here after you've flushed it once or twice, check your tank to bowl bolts, and also check inside there. Make sure that there's no pooling of water, and then you know that the tank to bolt gasket is also sealing properly. The tank is full now, so without further ado, let us do our maiden flush. That looked pretty good. Then you want to go down along here, check for any water, see if anything comes out. Do the same thing on this side, check for any leaks. Run along the edge of your toilet, looking for any leaks after your flush. If you don't see any, you're in good shape. We'll give it another flush here. Usually I like to do 3 flushes just to really stress that wax seal and make sure that we're not going to have any leaks. It also gives time for the supply to fill. And third and final flush. I still see no water, and I still see no water here. So now that we've tested, we can go ahead and put our cover caps on. Put this one on as well. You'll hear them click. The final thing to do is to put your tank cover on and flush, and make sure that it will flush with the lid on, which it sounds like it did. And with that, the new toilet is in, all installed. Alright, with that, the old toilet's in the back of the truck. That'll do it. This was a step-by-step guide on how to remove and install a new toilet. So with that, I hope you guys got something out of this. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please remember to leave a like down below. Please comment, let me know what you thought. Maybe you do it a little bit different. I'd love to hear about it. And please subscribe so that we can catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.